So, welcome. It's good to see you all here tonight. Or it's tonight for me. It's today for some of you folks. It's a little different. We got a European contingent here, but Kyle has managed to show up. It's like early afternoon for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 2.
Okay, that's a good time. Yeah, that's good.
It's 14 actually.
Well, yeah, as we like to say.
People who can't count past 12.
For all of us who were in the military at one time, we got used to that 24-hour clock, so it was nice,
right.
Easy transition for us when we got into civilian life. But
right.
Europeans do like their 24-hour clock. It keeps things sorted. That AM PM. I can't tell you how many people get confused about that, even Americans, especially when they're trying to call me, like my family. Fortunately, I had one brother who was in the military, so he gets it. The other ones they're still working on it. So this is part 4 of Mr. Kastrup's The Idea of the World, and this was almost like I'm going to say this part of the book was almost like a pleasant little interlude. They were short chapters. They were very much related to one another. The focus was very clear on, well, let's take another look at some of the evidence that speaks not only for his view of the world, but this whole brain issue is a big one for physicalists at any rate, and I kind of have some ambivalent feelings about how he deals with it, because he says really early on in the front matter that the person's the brain, so he kind of like acknowledges that physicalist side of things, but I don't think he really thinks it's that way because of his overall approach. Still, here he does say, well, let's take a look at what's going on in the brain and how do we explain that, because there's just some fascinating things. The first chapter was about all of those things where you would expect that brain activity being inhibited, it would inhibit our conscious perception. There's Michael. I knew he would show up sooner or later. Hi, Michael. How you doing?
It's raining.
It's raining. Well, I have to repeat this, but it never rains in Southern California.
That's a freaking song.
You're not going to get it out of your head either. So.
No. It was imprinted a long time ago in high school. Yeah. Hi, guys. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. And believe it or not, we just started.
I am on time then.
Actually, you are. You were fashionably late. We can call it that. We waited for a little while because everyone's not getting in and out the way they would like to these days, and we thought, okay, we could wait a few minutes. But
now, I just have a question. Are we going to get Zoom bombed?
I don't know. I have no idea. All as I know is I can push this button and it stops and it starts, and everything else is up to the people who actually know what they're doing. So
okay, sounds good.
I was just given a kind of a brief resume of these chapters where we were, Bernardo focuses on brain activity, and especially in the first chapter where you would think that the things that happen that inhibit brain activity should somehow reduce our level of consciousness, but the opposite seems to be true, which is a very fascinating kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then in the next chapter, he looks at the psychedelics side of it. Maybe Daniel can tell us something. Here's a little, well, some of us have experience that is very informative from a long time ago.
I was going to say, that was one of my favorite chapters.
It's like the old saying goes, if you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. So
yeah, I don't remember a freaking thing other than I was there.
So that I kind of went down that path as well, and I have to say it's one of those. It was good thing to do at the time. I don't see any reason not to. So I'm kind of glad how things have developed. But anyhow, the secondary guy. So that's chapter 12. But as usual, I'd kind of like to get you guys' impression. What I have to say really is not important. I'm just setting up the pages in the meetings. So we can find out what you have to say, and then we'll start from there. What do you think? So who's got some first impressions for us?
Well, I can go this time first. And yeah, as you said, it was a pleasant read with after those previous two chapters that were quite dense. But yes, this topic, I have been obviously intrigued by it. I have been following this topic, but more, not so much actually from the psychedelic trance of point, but most from the near-death experiences. And it's quite interesting because they have gathered already quite much like evidence which would support this theory that there is conscious awareness even on the flat line. So there is the debate, what is going on, if there is any debate, is really like, how is this possible? Like, I think even like the burden of explanation is, I think even in the book it says like, now the burden of explanation is on their side, that how is it possible that cardiac is flatline, and even the brain scan is flatline, and still people come and bring memories and cognitive processes that couldn't be possible in the physicalist paradigm, if you may. And there is a project, there has been investigations, like individual investigations, but there is a project called Aware Project that was some years ago. They came up with the first results, and they started a new one, Aware Project 2, which they have refined all the research setting. I mean, when there is the resuscitation or the recovery, they have put like even the sounds and I don't think even some visual thing that when people have the near-death experience and have the out-of-body experience, that what can they recall, like visually and in terms of hearing. So they have set, and they are, from what I can follow, that there are people who are really like that this could be the game changer. Like when these results came out, I mean, at least maybe there is some wishful thinking in that, but from what I can read, that already the results from the Aware Project 1 were that stirred the discussion, and now they are waiting that when they get released, or when they at some point in 1 year, 2 years get them out, that it will like the discussion goes to another level, definitely. So yeah, so that goes in line with the analysis and what Kastrup was telling in these chapters 11 and 12.
So the Aware Project is, I didn't catch exactly who was doing that.
It's led by a physician from New York, Sam Barnia. I think that's his name.
Oh, okay.
I can send a link to a blog that follows that and where's the discussion. But it's Sam Barnia. It's a physician that has done the first one, and so maybe there's like a research team, but it's led by Sam Barnia.
Okay. I was just, this brings to mind something from like 50 years ago for me, or almost that. So, you know, there was a physician named Raymond Moody. Yeah, everybody knows Raymond Moody, right? Life After Life. So he was actually, I remember when I was in school, I don't know, I was in Augusta, Georgia, the home of the masters. And he came and talked to our class, or he gave a presentation actually on campus that this was right after his book was initially published, and at that time nobody had really heard of near-death experiences. I don't even know if that term existed, but I just remember that being a very striking presentation from him. And it's so I think this has been gathering momentum or gathering evidence over a period of 50 years at least. And it sounds like this AWARE project is actually a kind of a culmination of something. Do you think?
Yeah, that's the idea that I get, that this is a culmination in some way of all the evidence that has been gathered, and now because obviously the skeptics, let's call them that, they have been really hard, like, oh no, but the setting of the experiment, it could be explained by some other. So now they have fine-tuned or really refined the thing that they have tried to close, obviously, the maximum, all possibilities where it's possible. And there is a discussion also, what I'm being following, where is death, like how it's like clinically, it's a bit tricky, like to determine what is the exact moment of death. Like, is it the brain death or the physical death? So yeah, so it involves lots of topics around it.
Yeah. That has become this question of when can somebody be declared dead? In some circumstances, it's very hard.
Yes, it is, and I think Daniel makes an important point that, and Kyle, you reinforce that this is starting. Nobody took it seriously at the beginning, and Moody's, well, that was very nice, but he got shoved off into the New Age corner very quickly as well. Because if you put people there, you don't have to talk about it in any serious way. But over time, the amount of evidence that starts accumulating becomes, I don't want to say overwhelming, but it becomes more convincing. It becomes something that you have to deal with. We've dealt with the topic on some of our cafes. We had one young lady I'll post links to them, but for the Marion project, she had 3 near-death experiences that she's been working with, because when she was, quote unquote, on the other side, she was actually given a task to bring back and to develop. So she's been working on that as well. It ties in with some other things that we have done that have nothing to do with that. And we also read a book by Edward Kelly and others. He and his wife edited it. They're at the University of Virginia. And the University of Virginia is actually promoting a very serious approach to any kind of paranormal phenomena. We'll use that as a general overview for heading for it at the moment. But near-death experiences are part of that, because there seems to be something about them that is very much worth investigating, and the time has come. And that's the part that I liked about it. The time has come where enough people have said, okay, well, let's look at this seriously. It's not, maybe it isn't an anomaly. I don't think it is, and they don't think it is, but it could be. But we don't know that it's an anomaly unless we actually collect the data and evaluate it and interpret it. And then we can say, okay, now it's anomalous. Otherwise, there's something that you have to deal with. And I think one of the criticisms that Kastrup has, and it's a correct one, is whatever is anomalous in the physicalist paradigm just gets shoved aside and said, well, we don't have to deal with it because it's an exception. It's not the rule. But it is something that arises, and it's something that occurs, and it's something that we need, I think. Therefore, you need to, if you are going to be a true scientist, and if you are going to conduct serious investigations of things, then you have to look at this as well, even if your own paradigm doesn't explain it. This is one of the things that Kastrup does in the first part of his book, where he says, well, in order for the physicalist, this was particularly section 1, I guess it was, if the physicalists are going to explain it, then they have to make these assumptions, or they have to throw this into the mix, because they can't actually get there from the assumptions that they're fundamentally working with. So and this was what Marco had pointed out with Occam's razor, introducing new ideas, concepts, or notions in order to explain. And I agree, you can overdo it with Occam's razor on the one hand, but on the other hand, whoever is introducing them then does have the burden of proof on their, well, why do I need to do that? Why do I have to introduce these new notions? Is there another way to go about it? And that's a difficult thing to do, which is why I appreciate what they're doing in Virginia. The book that we read some sections from is called Irreducible Mind by Edward Kelly. I'll put a link in the discussion thread, both to what we've talked about and to the book itself, so that you know what I'm referring to. And I've been corresponding with a guy in Ireland about Jean Gabser, who is a cultural philosopher who developed a model for the unfoldment of human consciousness. And he turned me on to a book by a doctor, medical doctor by the name of, I think it's Ibn Alexander. It's an odd name, but his last name is Alexander. It's called Proof of Heaven. And I don't know if any of you have come across it, but what I found so fascinating about the book was he's a neuroscientist, and he got a brain disease where he went into a coma for 7 days. And he was, and this goes back to your point, Daniel, when are you dead? Because they were actually thinking about pulling the plug when he woke up from these 7 days, because they just figured that he was never coming back again. And when he came back, he had one of these an experience for 7 days. And guys, I think we need to take another look at this, and that which is the way he goes about writing his book, which is very sympathetic. I only read the introduction in like chapter 1, so I'm really anxious to get through the other things I'm reading in order to pick it up, because he was given a very detailed tour. So it's almost like, we know you're skeptical about all of this, and we know that you're not really into it, but maybe you want to just take a look around and see, and then think about it when you go back, kind of thing. That's the impression I'm getting. So it's a very strong case, because I knew a couple of people when I was in California who had them, and Lynn Claire, who we had the Marion sessions with, she said this. The people that I knew said this, and Dr. Alexander is saying the same thing. They all have been given this charge, so to speak, or this admonishment at any rate, to tell others about what they've seen and what they've experienced. It's not like it's just something, of course you're a little reticent, and maybe you're just slowed on the uptake. Maybe I don't want to just rush out and do this, because I do have a reputation to defend as well. But it's important that I communicate this part of it so that we take a serious look at it. And I think those approaches are always the more helpful ones. But it's obviously one of those areas that's gaining a whole lot of momentum, which is why I'd be really interested as well, Daniel, in the link to the AWARE project and the other things. If we can get that in the thread, that would be really, really good. So that's all I had to say about it.
Just to add to that, curiously, I just noticed that the Ibn Alexander had just tweet like Kastrup retweeted or something, like he's like Ibn Alexander saying really looking forward in reading your books or something like
that. That's really interesting because interestingly enough, if you've already, I don't know how many of you read the book all the way through, but the annex, the appendix, he talks about life after death. And he didn't include it in the body of the book because he had been asked to write that article. Everything that's in the book are things he submitted for peer review. And he said, but I was asked to write this article for another publication, and so I included it as well. So when we only have 2 more sessions with this, and then we get to the back matter, all the things that are at the end, I think it gets really interesting because he gets out of this academic approach where he's writing papers and trying to make a case, and he can be himself again in a certain regard. So that part I think would be kind of fun. But that's a real interesting twist. So I guess their paths have crossed as well. That's really good to know. Really good.
So thank you. I mean, it was very interesting thoughts. I'm chaining some of the thoughts. There was the question about death and when, let's say we should really, in fact, there are studies, about revisiting, okay, from the medical perspective, neurological perspective, when death should be really defined, right? But what I really find more interesting is that with, let's say, the idealist Kastrup's ontology, so what does it mean, death, right? So because in principle, everything is mental, and when we talk about death, it's basically death of the physical bodies, right? That under the physicalism paradigm is the death of the physical body. The physical body and the physical brain is what originates consciousness, and then when you die, basically you are gone, right? So that is what the physicalism paradigms leads us to think, right? And therefore, I think under this paradigm, it's relatively easy to talk about death. You could argue whether it's when, according to the accuracy of the instrumentation, you can measure certain brain waves, etc., and you can perhaps, be more accurate or detect even weaker waves, etc. So you could even postpone death, longer than what today you would consider a dead body and irrecoverable in the sense of going back to the physical life, then define death from that perspective. I find it easier. Now, under this idealist perspective, actually, what is death, right? So that is just a reflection, okay, in general. Because probably for the idealist, it shouldn't be a big deal, right? So when that physical death happens, really, it is more, what does it mean, to go from this stage of life into another stage, right? Because in the end, universe and the whole universe, it's mental, and therefore it's there. So on one hand, I like those chapters because Kastrup tries to again bring idealists as a simpler theory to explain some of those phenomena that we see, different kind of brain impairments situations. However, I'm not entirely convinced that physicalism couldn't explain those, maybe not today, but in the future, right? Even, for example, those accounts of near-death experiences or psychedelic experiences, etc., that at some point physicalism could elaborate a theory that could explain those experiences, or even under cardiac arrest, and in theory you are dead and you are having those experiences and then you are back to life. It's difficult for today for physicalism to be able to explain that, but we don't know. I mean, or at least this is how the physicalists play the game, right? So we cannot explain today, but be sure that we will be able to explain it in the future, right? And I think Kastrup says no. I think there is an easier way to explain that, which is with idealist ontology, right? And I think this is what he tries to do. But for example, this argumentation that he proposes that richer inner experiences mean under physicalism a higher metabolism or activity of the brain. I'm not entirely sure that that is necessarily correct under physicalism. I'm not fully sure what physicalists would reply to that, because this is a constant argumentation that he makes, right? Now, obviously, when I look at how he proposes his ontology, and those analogies of the whirlpools and the brain as the external viewpoint of local, let's say, localized consciousness. When we talk about impaired brains or injured brains, etc., obviously those are kind of disturbed whirlpools that eventually they are not anymore playing that whirlpool as a whirlpool, but they are like starting to leak outside of the whirlpool, communicating with the rest of this mind at large, right? And there is where then all these self-transcendent experiences happen. And I think this is how he tries to, explain all these experiences and phenomena from his ontology. And I think it's quite consistent, and I am quite comfortable with that. What I'm not fully sure is that, he can really use this argumentation with physicalism. So I'm comfortable that that under idealist, all these things have a simple, or could have a simpler explanation, and it all works and fits. So it's a good signal, okay, that we are going in the right direction, and it seems a good account to understand the reality. But I'm not fully sure it's strong enough to all those experiments and these counterintuitive under physicalism results to say that physicalism it's false, right? And because I believe in the future physicalism eventually could explain this, and those are basically the thoughts that I have. But what I'm most interested is not so much in this, but actually the kind of experience itself, right? So all those self-transcendence experiences due to different situations. I think this is more interesting, and even for an idealist like me, what is after death? So what does it mean? So we are used to live in this kind of a local world, if you want, and local consciousness and ego kind of a world. So death and for an idealist doesn't exist, as a physicalist would understand. So what happens after your brain dissolves? That whirlpool fuses with the mind at large. Okay, so what really happens? And of course, I mean, Kastrup nobody would explain that. It's just you can get those explanations if you want through accounts of people that have lived these different situations, right?
Yeah, I think I ask myself, who is the audience? Who is Kastrup really trying to get get under the skin of just not hardcore physicalists maybe, but all those people who are open, you know, skeptical but open to interesting possibilities, right? Open to another point of view. And so to me, he doesn't have an airtight case by any means. You know, like you say, he's, people love to say, well, you know, we don't have it figured out yet, but we will pretty soon, or we will sometime or other. And meanwhile, we don't have to buy into any of this idealist stuff, right? So I think that if he is basically trying to present something that makes people think, right? It makes people think that maybe their way of, the way they've been taught to think isn't the only way. I think he succeeds well at that, and I think that perhaps that is all he would expect to achieve with that. I mean, you know, that maybe is sort of his target audience is. And I mean, I'm in his target audience. I have a pretty strong skeptical streak myself, and it's just, you know, I think he said this somewhere or other. He said, well, you know, you need to look at these at these different kinds of evidence, but maybe until you actually have a non-ordinary experience of your own, you know, unless you have some sort of non-ordinary consciousness experience, whatever that may be, you can read all the books on idealism you want, and you might not get it, right? So so I would like to think that Bernardo is not, he's not underestimating the power of the prevailing paradigm, and you know, he's fighting an underdog kind of fight here, right? So which is just the way it is, I guess. But you know, if you go back, I like to go back 300 or 400 years and try to get a sense of what it was like then, because you know, a lot has been gained and a lot has been lost, right? So and this is partly maybe why the scientific world is so adamant about, you know, keeping a narrow view of things, because they have not been on top for that long, you know, in the larger scheme of things. So yeah, they should be a little insecure, right? Anyway, that's about all I had for that.
Well, that insecurity is actually the basis of science, if they really think about it. And listening to comments and stuff and reading the book. This whole issue of death affects me differently than what I hear in the book and read about it, only because I've had personal experience with it. Like you said, Kyle, you know, I think having a non-ordinary experience kind of breaks open your mental container. You know, reading is good. I get it. Sometimes that can at least, you know, chip away at whatever mental things you have. But death always represents to me as the unknown. And there is no fucking way, in my opinion, that the physicalist or the idealist is going to explain that and put that in a box. It's not going to happen. But they have two different ways of at least embracing that. Like Einstein, and I'm probably misquoting, felt that the most religious experience is the sense of the mystery of it all. There's not going to be one explanation, but we do need rigorous ways to at least not be overwhelmed and live in fear of the unknown. We actually have those disciplines helps us space, the final frontier, you know, Star Trek, you know, and that. But it's not just, the thing is I think I have trouble because we've lived under this absolute divide between the public and the private. And why is it just the outside space that gets all the stuff that we, and we're not supposed to point it at us and look at the inner space and the unknown that's in us. And that's one thing I take from Castro or Bernardo, is he's just shown me how to, he's just another perspective on physicalism, and he's at least given me some input on that I didn't understand of how, well, let's question some of their assumptions. I don't think he's totally trying to destroy it, but it's like any good science. You want to look at your assumptions, you know? And that kind of rigorous, and I've incorporated, that has flexibility, is what I've taken from reading, especially these two chapters, and especially psychedelics, because, and actually both of them, because I've both had a near-death experience and I've done psychedelics. So I'm coming from a very personal approach in reading this book.
And I think that's a very valid point, Michael. One of the things that's always bothered me about mainstream science is that they say it is, when what they actually mean is, well, we think it is. We think it's this way. We're not sure what we think, but they say it is. And it's really difficult, and especially now, you know, when the little bit of TV I watch, or when I'm listening to news reports, or I'm watching portions of a talk show, there's any number of people who will say, well, things are like this. And they have this very authoritarian, very confident demeanor, and they say things as if they had all the facts at their disposal. And when you stop to think about what they're saying is, well, based on what you know so far, and on the data that you've been given, you are interpreting it in a particular way. So this is your best guess at the time. It really is not any more than that. It's just your best guess at the time. But we've been kind of conditioned on the one hand to think that whatever the experts are telling us, this is a point John brings up a lot in a lot of our discussions that we have, that the experts always present it as if they know, but it's really just their guess. So we can look at whatever it is that they're telling us, and then we the outsiders or the third parties or whoever we are, we have to decide, well, how well does that fit or jive with what it is that I think or what I believe, for whatever reason. You have personal experience. I don't have that same extent of personal experience. We overlap in certain areas, you know, and we go through that, which is a nice thing about the cafes, because we can share all that. And so that, you know, enables us to actually take in more than we probably would have individually. But somehow we have to sort and sift through that all and come to some kind of conclusion ourselves. You know, one of the things we've never talked about in our cafes here in the Kastrup line, and I don't think there's been an opportunity to do it, and I'm not suggesting that we do, but how many of us are actually dyed in the wool anything? Or are we really and everyone has a bit of skepticism somewhere. You know, I'm certainly not a physicalist, but I don't think I'm an idealist either. And I'm not sure that I'm a panpsychist. Well, Jeffrey did mention, you know, he tends in that direction. He said, well, I tend in that direction because these aren't the things that we normally sit down and think about on a Thursday afternoon. It all kind of bubbles and cooks in that cauldron, you know, up here, and then we come up with things. And I know that I change mine all the time as we go along, because as I get more information, I try to place it in. But I find myself, maybe it's because of the literature I was reading just prior to this on Steiner's and his 12 ways of viewing the world, where I'm starting to think about, well, you can look at it like this, and you can look at it like that, and you can look at it like this, because there's a lot of things we just don't know. And when we get to the points that we don't know, and this goes back to what you had said, Michael, about the assumptions, that once we don't know, that's what we fall back on, whatever it is that we assume. And it's helpful, I think, if we can question those in very cautious ways. I don't think it's a good idea to just throw them overboard. You know,
yeah, I think having assumptions is just a beginning of feeling our way through the dark. I don't want to give up that part of thinking.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I think what we're running into, we can see where our thinking becomes so contracted, so narrow and clingy. And I don't want to just flow it, you know, open the doors. No, I did that with acid, and that was a unique experience.
Right.
But I'm not going to do that every day.
Right. Well, one could, but you know.
No, yeah, but that's your choice. It's not mine.
Timothy Leary, that was their option.
Yeah.
Just do it every day. Okay.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily have to get on that path either. I agree with you.
Yeah.
But at some point we realize, well, okay, I need to question those. Maybe it's something we say, well, I'll take care of that. Maybe I will take care of that next Thursday. I'll put it on my to-do list. But you know, I tend to roll those over myself. Bernardo does make some points where he points out, well, these are things we need to think about, because how he said, I think they would probably try to explain it this way, and that won't work. Okay, which could be very helpful. This is Jaime's point. Okay, so take another look at it and try a different approach. My feeling is take whatever you have and work with it. See how far you can get, and when you run into trouble, come up with it, whatever you need to come up with, and keep working at it. You know, I'm all for that, because I'm not convinced that anyone actually knows. We can only suspect. And it's very helpful, whether it's Moody's, whether it's, you know, Claire Dennis's, whether it's the other people that I know, whether it's even Alexander. They've had some experiences, and they said, oh, I'm going to share these. This is what I saw. This is how I felt. This is what I got out of it. And I'm going, okay, and I can put that into my evidence pot and let that stew around and stir it up and see, okay, well, how far does that get me, and what is it that I want to do? Interestingly enough, in the biography I'm reading of Goethe at the moment, we're in the last phase of his life, and he starts wrestling with this stuff as well. He's looking at Neoplatonism. He's going back into the the Neoplatonists. He's looking at a whole bunch of things that he's trying to work into what he's doing, because obviously what he thinks he thought up until now isn't completely satisfactory. And I think that's a healthy thing. You know, thinking that you've got it all figured out. I don't know. I've never been a person that figured he's got it all figured out. But I also imagine, for me at any rate, that thinking that I have it all figured out is a very limited way of living. Because there's, you know, what else am I going to look forward to, or what's going to surprise me, or where's the next excitement going to come from if I've got it all?
Yeah, and it also leaves out, I think, something that's not talked about a lot is there can be a certain, I think we're born, I'll just put it this way myself, we're born with a certain excitement about not knowing, but it's not nurtured. Think of a child. A child, we've lost that. If we could bring that forward into adulthood, that would be an amazing thing, because that's one thing that adults do, is they get into this safety component of how to think about things. And there's a certain need for that. I'm not going to, you got to cross the street, as Suzuki says, but we've kind of suffocated or stuffed it down, that childlike curiosity of the unknown, of life in general. I think this is part of what these conversations stimulate in me, is I feel like, in some sense afterwards, I feel like I'm a child, but a grown-up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree what you've said around, what we know, what we think, that we cannot know everything, obviously. What I like from the ontology that Bernardo's proposes is that it gives you a very good platform to very quickly recognize that. So first of all, things like, for example, the scientific method, with all the merits and the wonderful things that we have achieved, it's what you said before, right? That people say it is, when we should be saying we believe, given the current observations, instrumentation that we have. This is the best theory that model all those observations, and we can even foresee and forecast certain behaviors. Okay, so, but that's all what we can say, because actually the one of the virtues of science is that it has to be falsifiable. And we have seen this with theories, classical mechanics, then with relativist theory, etc., right? And quantum mechanics and all that. And there are still some things that today's science that they had to put in their theories cannot explain, like dark energy, dark matter, and all those sort of things, right? Which are as mystical as almost believing in gods or semi-gods or whatever, right? So I would say today, to believe in dark matter, it's equivalent to believe in whatever Greek god, at the same level of belief, right? So, and also the very same thinking process is limited. Language is limited. I mean, I think we have talked about that already in previous sessions, and therefore it is, but I think Kastrup brings all these ideas clear, and then you quickly understand, I mean, that what also Socrates said, no, that and that the reason that he was the wisest man, because he said, I know that I know nothing, really. I mean, and but this is not what happens today, and perhaps it's not so much, I agree with you on the ontology, because looking at those 12 different perspectives, maybe in the end, you know, is none of them, but it's different ways to approach what we believe is the nature or the authentic nature of the reality. But none of them are really complete, would be complete. It's just an attempt to get there. It is more that we have to recognize the limits of the scientific method. And this has, I think, hurt a lot the possibility to extend our knowledge. So for that, you have to go through other kind of you know, practices like religious practice or psychedelics or you know, the different kind of ways that it's more having certain personal experiences than just doing scientific experiments, right? And the moment and the danger that I see with the scientific method is that it's more an either or. Okay, so this is the only way to get to know what is true, you know, and we know that it's a journey. So perhaps we're not gonna get ever to that famous theory of everything that will explain everything, including why we are here and what is our purpose in life and all those things. So there are many scientists that believe that they will come to find this theory that will explain everything. And I think this is the dangerous thing, really, basically to exclude other avenues to really know. And unfortunately, it's the problem of the scientific method is that since it's based on observations, scientific observation, and then replication of the experiments. And in principle, an observation is something that is this consensus reality that we share, right? So we have to measure the same thing somewhat. Otherwise, it doesn't belong to science anymore. So it's quite problematic, okay? Because some of the knowledge comes from personal experiences, right?
Yeah.
And
like Einstein,
we
his
can just
theory.
talk about exactly. We can just talk about it, and that's it, right? So I cannot measure it, and then I cannot ensure that you will get the same experience. Probably you're not going to get the same experience, right? So yeah, that's the problem.
But I think Einstein and true scientists that honor the limitations of science and stuff, they are engaged that talking about it is probably the first step. Maybe we won't replicate it one-on-one, but to share the ideas that of personal experience, like me sharing, like, you know, I've had certain, that is a large component of appreciating the edge of the limitations and maybe pushing the limitations a little bit. What I love what you just said, Jaime, because one of the things concerns me is science has been, the way it has been used, especially the last 100 years, 150 years, it's pushing the limits for reasons that are unhealthy. And even Einstein and a lot of the theorists say, what the fuck are you doing with this system? You know, you're creating violence. You're trying to go, you're trying to move beyond your limits before you're even, you know, grounded in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you.
I had a thought along those lines, and then I kind of lost track of it. But basically, we're talking about first and third person kinds of things, right? So science is, there's no such thing as first person science, is there? I mean, there's phenomenology is the closest thing to first person science, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and contemplative practices, yeah.
Yeah. So, but when I say science, I mean, it's a path of knowledge.
Yes,
path
right.
of knowledge. It is not a way, you're not measuring things with a ruler. You're not measuring
No.
things quantitatively, and you're not just not seeing the world that way. So I don't know. To me, there's a lot of back and forth, arguments that just don't acknowledge that simple sort of dichotomy, or that simple way of separating things out, right? That there are, the trouble is when people say, well, I want some authority to tell me what's true about the world. Well, there are some severe limits about what anybody can do to provide that kind of comprehensive view of things. And good scientists don't claim to do things like that unless they're desperate for a grant or something. So
Kyle,
anyway.
I have a question. Though.
Yeah.
You brought up very good of how the dualism is laid out with the first person and third person.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that this conversation right now and what's happening in the world right now is that interpersonal of how we relate to each other, and the third person perspective is still helping us. How do we do that? Conversation is trying to reach between, to me, this is the way I experience, and right here and now, is between the personal and the third person, in the sense that I don't know you, I'm using this machine, and I'm having to reach across and trust there's something between, and that is a very uncertain place, I think, that you're pointing to. But we need to learn how to work it, because the way it's been shoved, we've been educated, is to maintain that duality in such a solid, rock solid way, when I think we need to kind of open it up a little bit, not necessarily totally destroy it, but see some porousness between the third person and the first person, and that in between is the interpersonal, from my experience.
So then that would be the second person.
Yeah, second person.
Actually, you and me.
Yeah.
And me exchanging thoughts.
Exchanging thoughts from our personal experience that we've gathered from even third person perspectives. Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of experience that, like dream experience or psychedelic. Anytime you're tapping into what they call an archetypal domain, right? Like I've been reading a lot of James Hillman lately, and he's all about archetypal psychology, and so when you get into that, if you go deep enough into the first person, you end up with some kind of collective universal experience. You share your sharing experience, even though, according to everything we're taught, unless you're a Jungian, that's just nuts, right? But Jung and Hillman and that kind of psychology has done amazing stuff done some amazing explorations of where does the personal and the universal.
Well, and how they're I like this word, interdependent, because I can share my experience of near death and with other people that have it, but that doesn't mean it's the same. It's just we shared a collective possibility of having an experience.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think sometimes people, when they enter the notion of the collective, is like it's one mushy white, no, you can still have a uniqueness in sharing your experience with somebody else's unique experience of this human experience, if I can put it that way, of archetypal type of experience.
Right. And these universals, like, like Mars and Saturn and these archetypal persons, these figures that have such universal traits. I mean, Saturn is black and Mars is red and that sort of thing. It's going to come out in different ways in everybody's dreams, everybody's experience.
I'm going to ground this in something very real. I had a different experience of my mother and my father than my brothers and sisters, but we lived under the same roof.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, this is what when we start talking like this, I find helpful to me using what you're saying of how do I ground it in this shared experience? How do I ground it? And part of the problem I think I have, even though I enjoy this book, but I have trouble with academia. It's because, and it's probably, that's just the nature of their territory. I don't feel grounded in their conversation a lot of the times.
Yes. No, I think, let me see if I get what you are trying to say. So we were talking about the scientific method, which is very much observation, instrument, third, objective about, and has to be replicable, everybody measuring exactly the same thing. We agree that this is very limited. With that, yes, we have made a lot of progress. Okay, we have also built very weapons of mass destruction as well with that. So this is
medicine and other good things too.
Exactly, and very good things too. However, we recognize that it's very limited because there is a whole world of first-person experiences that we cannot ignore. Okay, so you have to be, especially if you have near this kind of more radical extreme experiences. Those are real experiences, right? So probably is the only thing real that you can feel as real. And but however, science doesn't deal with that. So how we bridge that gap between this objective reality, and this very much personal experience. And I think what you are proposing, because I also try to find what could be the solution. I'm always thinking about how we can extend science to go from where it is today to something that can help us also to bring these more personal experiences. And what you are proposing or saying, Michael, if I understand well, is that by sharing our personal experience that don't need to be the same, but have some common traits and eventually archetypes, we can maybe think that we are seeing similar things or having similar experiences, but the experience is unique, right? Then we can build a sort of science, because to me now, either it's science or it's mysticism. Mysticism as a just personal myself, personal experience that I can only live through. I could choose your method, okay, either technology or prayers and etc. So how we close that? Because at this moment, science doesn't want even ignores completely and dismisses completely mysticism. Yes. I don't think mysticism does the same with science. I think it's more embracing, to be very honest, but also it's personal, so it doesn't deal with consensus reality, but how we bridge that gap. And I like what you just mentioned, because I have also tried to think hard about how we can make science better, improve science, and make it more embracing of also this. I don't think that with instruments only, we're going to go anywhere, to be honest.
Yeah, I think there, for me, the crossover has always been because of my Zen training of having a curious, inquiring mind. I think science is based on that.
Yes.
If you are curious, if you inquire, you know, they have observations and all that, but those same traits, qualities of being curious and inquire, I think the crossover between the two, and this is a personal bias, is art. The art crosses over between mysticism and science, only because art is based on somebody being curious. Why is that way? I want to make it different. I want to change it, you know, or just watching a child being curious and doing the curiosity of a child, and then adding that discipline, flexible, rigorous discipline of inquiry, like we have the last 10 minutes. That's what we just did in my book. Thank you, Jaime.
Thanks.
Yes, it's a very interesting topic, and on my side, I would like to add that I think, honestly, one of the biggest problems is the scientists themselves and how much they are invested in their egos, and because they can't be objective, they are not being intellectually honest, they are not being coherent. So one thing is the limitation of the instruments, but another big issue is like to be really science to himself or herself. I mean, in coherence and intellectual honesty and objectivity, and in that, and remind me that I don't know, are you aware that like this Kastrup had a debate, a very heated discussion, kind of like a polemic between the researchers of the Imperial College of London with his psychedelic studies, and so basically, if I try to explain, is precisely of these results that they are getting, that it reduces the brain activity. So the Robin Carhart Harris, that is also referred in the book or in these chapters, in these articles, that he has conducted some of these studies, or with the fMRI and with the brain scanning, and so they made an interpretation that plays to their physicalist paradigm, that they are openly assume they are physicalists, and they made an interpretation. They read the results in a way that plays to their confirms. And Kastrup said, no, it doesn't say this. The results, you can't conclude, you can't make that reading interpretation results. So they got into this debate discussion. It was like two years ago maybe, and it got to the point where Kastrup revealed some of them private correspondence that they had before the public discussion, like saying that I'm very unfortunately and apologetically, but it has come to the point where I have to take this private correspondence. It's on his blog at some, like the case of Robin Carhart Harris, like setting the record straight. That's the name, setting the record straight. So they go through the tweets and the email correspondence, and like, first of all, I don't have the capacity to evaluate like what it's like technically, what does it mean? But it does give me, obviously, I'm biased, I'm with Kastrup, but it does give me the sensation that Robin Carhart Harris is not being honest, like lacks some integrity, at least to the way he presents publicly the findings. Like he's not being objective and coherent in how he presents. And Kastrup attacks, not attacks, but he says like, no, yeah. So that's one thing. And it resumes, like, well, what I think that the material, the physicalist paradigm, it's so culturally impregnated that it's so easy to speak from the, like, yeah, so that's yeah, and for me it's unfortunately, because obviously I'm passionate. I come from a personal place to this, from the experiential place, and I'm passionate, and I've been surrounding this question, this hard problem of consciousness, like since already from quite years, not very sophisticated in the academic terms, but still I like to believe that I have been open to refutations and to debunking, but my personal experiences, and now with this idealism, and with before this with the mystical kind of point of view, they have just kept me, like, there hasn't been a physicalist theory or explanation that could have made me like convinced, if that's what I not. And so yeah, and this, just curiously, I just feel, if you allow me just still more, just a few days ago I had a discussion with so this is I don't know him personally, but we are in the same psychedelic association. He's a Finnish guy, and he did like a master's thesis about psychedelics. And it's like, between the lines, I was reading that he was also like kind of the physicalist, materialistic point of view was there more present. And then I said, hey, you are like, so what's going on with this materialist? So you are a materialist? And he comes, no, like, why you are like making a straw man, like, I'm not a material, how dare you, like, he is a pragmatism in the faith of William James. So and I started, like, for me, from where I'm coming from, that's weird. That's like, how can you as a philosopher like stand and say to, because I understand that it's very like mature, it's like, oh, we don't know nothing, obviously nobody knows what's going on, and I'm always like the Socrates, that I know that I just know, but it comes to a point that I can't just be on top of the fence, like in my case, like, and it's weird for me because he said, like, I'm a pragmatist, that the truth is defined by determined what works, something like that. I'm not, that's why I'm
Yeah.
naive what
Yeah.
it sounds like, but it's like the truth is only what works, and kind of like psychedelics are truth, or the experience is truthful because the experience works to some point. And it's, for me, it's very obscure at some point, like, well, so, and I thought, so yeah, and I was having this discussion, and because at some point it kind of alienated, because, and then he got to the conceptual things, that what is truth, it's got so like etheric, like, what's the definition of truth, that one gets like in practical life and this is not scientific, but it's like, it's just alienating. It's kind of like, it gets you into the existential paralysis that you can't apply it to one's life. And I dare to say that because, like, that's, and yeah, and then he accused me that, but hey, why are you having this crusade to against materialism? And it's like Kastrup has also being accused of being a crusader, of a warrior to materialism. And I like, my explanation is like, because it's so dominant on the cultural, and like it has such an hegemony, or like in the discourse, on the narrative, and it's like it penetrates the cultural sphere, like what scientists can say, like their position of their material, it ends up in even in everyday level. I mean, what I mean by this is like the way, if the materials paradigm is the way we relate not only to ourselves but to nature. It's like, I might say, like, if you are under the materialist paradigm, you have a more instrumental, objectifying relationship to nature, and then you can, it's more natural, it's more to explore, to exploit things. So I might be going too meta on this, but that's what I think. Like, I see it almost that it has consequence. Like, it's not irrelevant in kind of like, hey, why are you having this crusade? Like, I don't feel threatened by idealism. Why are you feeling threatened about materialism? Well,
I'm sorry, Daniel, but
no problem.
I'm going. I would have a definite response to that.
Yeah, but I see the consequence. Like, at least if I'm not like being paranoid, but it's like I see the consequence on mental health. I see the consequences of like, what are we? It's consuming, like consumption. It's also and I think Kastrup also talks about this, that if the main message, if the message between that this is, we are all just materialists and this is all just atomic objects, and it's like kind of natural to think, okay, so the life is about consuming materialist objects. And so it even goes down. Okay, sorry about my rant. It's
Oh, that was a good rant. I like
Yes.
that. I love that rant. That was a good rant.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too.
Me too. Me too.
Well, me three.
Yeah.
But by the way, I mean, I talked about science and scientific process, method, etc. Now that you talked about pragmatism, I have great respect for science with uppercase S. And I believe the scientist, the first scientist, so we have to go back to old good Greece, okay? The first, even they were, some of them materialist and some other idealist, you know, more, idealist. But even the materialist, I think still I mean, the way that they were doing science was with integrity, you know, and probably, I mean, the instruments at that point in time were very limited, et cetera, observations also very limited. I think the science today in the last 100, 200 years, I think it's a complete different, it's just a very narrow science and very pragmatic science, because it's a science that has to be useful for something, right? Even though, you know, there is dark matter and very, you know, more kind of a basic science, if you want, but in the end, it has to be pragmatic. You have to write research papers, even if many of them are just very superficial, or because you have to get your grants, etc. So there is a whole cycle there that I think is what makes many scientists today not really honest with what they are writing, etc. And here we can talk about all the different scientific disciplines, medical, physical, climate. So it's everywhere, right? And I think this is what is really, I am a crusader against pragmatism. But the science, and in principle, I don't have any problem with science as what you just said, Michael, to have to be curious, to be to want to really be honest with yourself, also humble in the sense that you know that most likely or for sure you're not going to know everything, so it will be always exploring new things and maybe getting more knowledge, etc., but it will be always an approximation to what it is out there. Just, and I really have a great respect for that, and I think is where we should go.
Just for a curveball, does anybody know the root meaning, the root of science, the word science? What's the root meaning, where it comes from? I'd be interested because we've been throwing that word around, and sometimes because it is a language game, sometimes going back to the
yes,
roots.
you're right.
I believe the root is probably Greek, but it's you know, it has to do with knowing.
Yes, it comes from the Latin sciro, I know. That's where it comes from.
Good.
So
Good. Yeah.
So it's a way of knowledge. It's trying to
Right.
find out
A way of knowledge, a way of knowledge.
A way of knowledge, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they've developed a method that this is something, you know, it's grown over time. And this is, you know, the point that Jaime made it earlier. A lot of practical things, good and bad, have come out of that by doing that. And Newton's laws of motion and all that he developed as a physical system allowed us to go to the moon. And it works, you see. But that doesn't mean in the end that it's right, whatever right means. It's simply a way that if you look at things this way, it allows you to do certain things. Pragmatism itself is it's a limited kind of philosophical view. And obviously it developed in the United States where let's get away with the least effort, you know. So how do you get the biggest bang for the buck? How do you get the most out of whatever it is that you're doing? And pragmatism will allow you to do that. For that reason, it's nice, but it's certainly not the last station on the tram line. It's just a way.
Well, it's also putting truth into one question that should be all 5 questions. It's how, not why, who, where, when. It's a narrow sticking to a narrow truth question.
Okay, my favorite, this won't surprise you, Michael, yine.
No, it won't, because no.
I know, because one of the problems that we've come up with over time, and it's particularly relevant today, is that whole, like, well, what is true? And what is truth? I mean, that's the question that Pilate presents, you know, in the gospel story, because it's all about truth somehow. Well, there are different truths, but they're not necessarily, and there are relative truths, and there may be different kinds of truths. And do we have a truth with a capital T as opposed to truths with small t's? And they're all, as far as I'm concerned, very legitimate questions and things that one can interact over and discuss and approach. What we find out when we do that, and this is the thing, and this is what I heard Daniel saying with his Finnish colleague there, he doesn't want to get off of where he is in his approach to that. You buy into it at some point. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's something, that's what you believe. And for the moment you believe that, and the moment that you are questioned in those beliefs, you will feel threatened. This is the discussion that we've had a number of times, Michael.
Yes.
You feel threatened. And when you feel threatened, you get hard over about stuff. Because it's hard, it's extremely difficult to be open about things. It's extremely difficult to say, well, maybe I don't know. We all like to quote Socrates, but how many of us really live Socrates in being open? And I have no idea, because you'll come across as wishy-washy, as non-committal, as not having a point of view, and anybody can do with you what they like. Well, maybe and maybe not, because I just don't know. I enjoy what this person says. I think that makes sense what this person says, and how does that fit into what it is that I'm trying to figure out? And the reason we go through that is that most of us don't sit down and examine our own presuppositions and assumptions that we make about things. And there was a German philosopher back in the 70s, Karl Otto Appel, who said that the whole purpose of philosophy was to question one's own presuppositions. That's all it's about. It's always to question yourself. Are you really feel secure with what you have? Not that you should feel secure. You should basically feel insecure most of the time and say, well, I need to know a little more. Maybe I need to gain a little more. Maybe I need some more insight. And when you do that, I took his advice to heart. And that's why I enjoy discussions like these, because I start getting input from all kinds of people and go, oh, I can see where that works. And I can see how that fits in. And I can see where that might provide an advantage. And it gives me more material to work with as I move forward. And I haven't come to a definite conclusion about anything, but I think I'm getting closer to something that I might think. And that's all I can do at this moment is what I might think is truth. It's interesting to find out what other people think that might be, because that gives me additional perspectives that I can, compare, contrast, and explore.
I think it's interesting also to look at the biographies of some of these scientists, especially Newton, and you're the one that pointed it out. He was into alchemy. He was into this other stuff that today that's new age, huh? Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
His part was like the leftovers. This was like
But to me, it points to his curiosity. He was curious and willingness to inquire about a wide range of things besides what he's well known for, and I think we leave out. That's why I've always liked to look at the background of some people I admire, and some of the stuff that they did I don't like, because some of it but that was the time. But I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater as terms of what they had to offer, but yeah, I agree that I think one of the things that we're trying to learn in this time at the world is how to be open and not threatened by it. Even though, and I'm coming from a bias of being a bouncer at a bar, there's sometimes you have to kick somebody's motherfucking ass. Even when you're open. I mean, I'm just saying that's an option. I'm not saying I have to go there, but, there's some people when you're open, they like to take advantage and they like to just bully you. And so you have to come up with ways to deal with that. And everybody has to in my book, take ownership of that, of the ways they deal with it, because openness doesn't guarantee you a safe space. And I think that's one of the edge that we're always working with, whether it's physical, emotional, or even intellectual, and even spiritual in certain spiritual planes. Yeah.
Actually, I think openness is probably it's threatening you. It can be life-threatening to be open, and that's, I think, beliefs is what the ego needs to survive, right? So the moment that you start threatening, exactly, the moment that you start threatening, so if you want to keep this open attitude and challenging your beliefs, it can be also dangerous, right? For your ego survival, right? Physical survival. So it's difficult to find the right balance.
The right balance, because a certain amount of danger is actually enlivening. It livens you up. I mean, why else would I jump off of a diving board at 10 years old into the pool and hurt myself because I did it wrong? It was exciting.
And same happens with things like integrity and all that. I mean, in the end, if you are a very integral person under certain circumstances, that can be the end of your life, right? This is what happened to Socrates, for example, right? So he was condemned to death penalty because he was corrupting young people, corrupting in the sense intellectually, because basically he was going around and saying, guys, you have to live a fulfilling life, you have to really question your beliefs and don't thinking that basically just making money or acquiring power is what is gonna make you happy. This is not gonna make you happy. And of course that was at that point in time, and today that would be, you know, really very disruptive, right? And he made lots of enemies, and in the end they condemned Socrates to death penalty for that. And in the end he defends himself in front of the court. The court decided death penalty, and he said, look, maybe if I would have given more time, I could have convinced you that what you are doing is wrong. But you know what, in the end, by the way, he had also a good reflection and discussion over death, right? So about this, okay, either death will be the eternal kind of sleep, okay, so that I will go like every day that I go to sleep, I will sleep, I completely lose sense of everything, and that's it. And therefore there is nothing to worry. Or what I hope, and he believed that was what was going to happen, is that he would meet with other very interesting people, and he could have other philosophers that were already past, etc., and could have very nice discussions with them. So that, and that was also a very nice outcome. So either way, you know, it was very nice for Socrates to basically assume that to take because he committed suicide in the end, right?
It's the dying part. Yeah, the dying part is the problem.
Exactly. Yes. But because he was an integral person, and he didn't want to say to beg for pardon in order to get it away, right? Because this is what the other guys were expected, that he would kneel in front of them and say, you guys, like Galileo, he did. And Galileo, I have great respect for Galileo, but Galileo at some point had to, you know, put back what he said about the earth and the sun and the universe, and because otherwise he was gonna also get punished with the death penalty as well. So questioning your own beliefs and trying to have integrity and honesty, it's not always the safest for your ego.
No, it's not, and it doesn't mean giving up the ego. It's just knowing that the ego has its limits, and it plays its game, and whatever in us, or just the act of questioning the ego's beliefs, kind of, I'd say, has helped me relax and not be unconsciously tied to its habits in a way, you know. And I just want to bring in that this is also centered for me, the notion of integral but power, your own personal power. Socrates deciding to commit suicide, that's one of the most powerful decisions you make for your life. Okay, motherfuckers, I'm out of here. You're not listening to me. You know, because either I'm going to sleep or I have my two choices and I'm going to live with them. And so I think this is tied to the ego in a way, because the ego is created of trying to make, and it has a legitimacy for survival, the power to survive, and that's important. But at some point, we have to understand it's necessary for my contemplative practices that the ego is just the decision how to survive, how to thrive, how to use that power. That the ego is just it gets flipped into a servant and not the God. It becomes a servant. It becomes another way of thinking of it that was very personal, is when I became a parent and I was raising a child, I reparented my own ego, because I was put in a position that I needed to protect my children. I had to guide them. I wasn't always good at it, but I was good at coming back and asking for forgiveness. And so I don't know. I was just in there. That's where I'm at.
I wanted to, since chapter 12 is about psychedelics, I wanted to at least devote a little bit to that topic. And I was definitely more interested in chapter 12 than chapter 11 because, you know, I mean, brain damage is really not much fun, basically. But,
I love it.
you know, so I have been experienced in that way, and I would certainly have to say that it changed my attitude about doing about thinking of the world in a bigger way, and I don't know, you know, it doesn't surprise me what Bernardo is reporting on just the ways that that the brain activity just sort of becomes I mean, you really feel kind of disconnected from your normal mental state, and so somehow that seems appropriate that would have that effect on brain activity. But I think the problem with psychedelics has been that, you know, nobody was really researching them, but now there's a huge amount of research going on compared to just a few years ago, right? There's a place in Amsterdam. Actually, there are numerous places where you can go and do a mushroom retreat, right? And it's still on my list. I still want to do that. So I don't know. I think if somebody is trying to comprehend what Bernardo is trying to get across, you know, some psychedelics wouldn't hurt. And I don't know if Bernardo has actually reported on, you know, if Bernardo has ever gone to one of those psilocybin retreats in Amsterdam or not, but he is Dutch, right? I mean, it would be convenient at least. But I have not read all of Bernardo's books. I've read 2 or 3 of them, but I don't remember actually coming across, you know, him reporting on personal experience that way.
I agree. I haven't. If he's got those experiences, he's not talking very much about them.
Which is probably good.
Yeah.
Because then they would just, you know,
exactly.
say, "Oh, Bernardo, you're just an old acid head. We don't want to listen to you."
Yes, that's what I believe is actually the reason.
Yeah.
Actually, he is pretty open. He has a quite vast amount of experience. He has grown his own mushrooms. He has experience with mushrooms, with salvia divinorum, and with LSD. And he talks, at least in his forum, there is some, and in one of his books, on podcasts, you know, in his interviews that he has done on YouTube, and in this forum, he says, and he gives a very remarkably important role to them. I mean, he says that they are definitely amplifying the consciousness, like the experience is definitely more than the baseline consciousness. that it's not an anomaly, it's not a confusing. There is so much going on and so coherent in the psychedelic trance space that it's definitely like a transcendental or transpersonal or something that goes in line with that. It's like the less dissociative state, or
exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
I read somewhere that, but I didn't know that he was talking. I mean, yeah.
It's on his blog,
more explicitly,
right?
and yeah.
In his, like this was in his forum, you know, the forum there.
Yes,
yes.
I am in the forum, but for some time I haven't seen much going on the psychedelics threads, I believe.
But this
recently,
I think this came out in some other topic. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the title of psychedelics. I don't know, in some way. But
and then the ones that I've seen, I haven't seen him getting in and you know, and participating. So probably those were a bit older. But I will go through it. I think I've seen some references, to some very like third-person kind of accounts of different experiences. There are very good resources out there. But of course, I mean, if you want to know, then you have to try, obviously. I mean, accounts, it's...
No, it's not the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, John Hopkins in the United States is one of the foremost that's doing research on psilocybin for multiple types of diseases, including alcoholism and end of life. Using it for end of life to help people, you know, as they die, but also for alcoholism and other kinds of things. They're really a surge in the United States, because I've been following people that are interested in that.
I read something on Bernardo's forum. I think someone who was going to a conference in Prague that was about psychedelics, and which is also where Stan Grof is from.
Yeah.
And so I would love to go to Prague anyway, but I wonder if the conferences were not in English, then it wouldn't do me much good. I'm pretty limited that way. But I think a lot of these conferences are in English.
They are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of them are. When you go, international conferences these days tend to be in English, whether they're in Prague or anywhere else. I can only highly recommend Prague. It's probably one of the most beautiful cities in Europe.
Agree.
And it's got a real vibe. Michael, it's got a real vibe to it as well. It's a really nice place to be. And if you happen to like beer, it's a good place for beer too.
Very good. Yes. Yes.
You can have a lot of things when you're in Prague. Okay. And in his More Than Allegory book, not just on his blog, I don't read his blog, but in his More Than Allegory book, he does have there's a vignette in there. It's kind of written as a novel, where there's this where he describes we'll call it psychedelically induced altered states of consciousness and how they might play into all of this. But he also relates some very personal experiences in that as well. So
I did.
He's not secretive about it. Like I said before, it's not something that you just hang out there when you're dealing in the academic community, because if you have no other reason to reject someone, you can always, do the ad hominem argument and say, but you're just. you know,
Mhm.
well, okay, whatever. But I think he's beyond that. But others are not beyond that to use it as an argument. That's the other thing. The nice thing about this book is that it is on sound academic footing, so he can play that game in that arena, and then when you get outside the arena, you can do a lot of other things and engage otherwise. So I noticed that we're coming up here on the top of the hour, and that's kind of where we.
I just wanted to just add to Kyle's, let's say, question or introduction of the psychedelic topic, that there are also other ways, right? I mean, this is what also, I mean, psychedelic have been there. It's I think, Daniel, you said it also in one of the previous sessions, that it's a technology, right? It's mainly a technology, but many of the substances and reactions, actually, you also build it in your, your brain and your body, etc. builds lots of stuff, chemical stuff, right? You have just to induce all those reactions. And this is what many mysticism practices, also do, and there are lots of interesting approaches to that. Fasting is one of them, for example,
Yes.
but of course, real fasting, not so, I mean, even there is this other Dutch guy, I don't know, Wim Hof, who enjoys bathing in ultra cold waters, and he's really a very tough guy, right? And he plays with very cold stuff.
That would put me in an altered state.
There are lots of stuff. Obviously, you have to be careful with anything, but there are other ways, that you can get certain states of raised consciousness, right? And mystics in the past have used those ways, right? And I mean,
yeah, and there's
and today, still today.
Yeah, and so this is I'm just going to make a leap, a connection to science. There's a training. There's you go through training to become a scientist, So mysticism of different ilks have shamanism. They have a training, an initiation. I want to bring that word in, initiating, and going through the, separating and then into the ordeal and then coming back to the community and having the community support you in your experience and reintegrate you. I think, because when you go through an ordeal, there's an altered state of consciousness. I mean, it's not maybe, there's altered states of consciousness that run a spectrum. LSD is going to really put you into an altered state of consciousness. Near death is going to do that. But a different altered state of consciousness that I just am going to advocate is watching my child being born put me in an altered state of consciousness. And seeing this human being come out of my wife's body,
Exactly. Yes.
But the thing is, this is part of being human, and there's ways to prepare for it. But this is the hard ass pushback on physicalism is you don't think that's fucking real? It's not just nothing. It's not. Sorry. That's my passion, Daniel, coming through. Thank you, guys. This has been a lovely conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Good.
Yes, me too.
Have any last comments on the topic per se, or on any summarizing remarks or last reflections that anyone wants to share? Don't want to, I'm not saying we have to cut this off right now. I'm just saying, maybe we should a little bit of order never hurt anyone. You know.
I think I already pretty much said everything that was on my mind, except that, you know, I'm really enjoying this this little group, and look forward to the next time.
Yeah, we're it is a real, it is a nice little group, so to speak. We have a very, you know, good interaction, and there's a good dynamic going on here. Whenever at a loss for things to say or contributions to make, that really makes things for me something to look forward to when we get together every couple of weeks. And so next time that we get together, we're going to look at the last section of the book. It's kind of like the last official part, the last two actual refereed articles kind of thing. And there he's going to try and sum some things up on why, how is it that physicalism got to be so dominant on the one hand. He's going to look at that, and he's also going to look at, but given all of its limitations, kind of a last hurrah for, well, why don't we have an alternative view? So he's going to compare those two when we wrap this up the official part the next time. I think the most interesting part of the book is the back matter anyhow, but we'll get to that forwards. So I'll put up a page for those. Everyone who's mentioned anything and made reference to something, please put it in the thread. That's always exceedingly helpful, so that we have pointers to things that we're talking about. And if nobody has anything else, I want to thank everyone for another great Tuesday evening for me, or afternoon for you, or wherever you are. It was time well spent once again. So
yes,
Sure.
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
right, I wish you all safety and happiness. Stay safe, isolate, and do your thing.
Exactly.
Hey, take care.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.